Last Christmas I reached my husband's parents' home early, holding my hope quietly because I was pregnant. But instead of joy, he accused me of carrying my boss's child. His words cut deeper than any wound, and he filed for divorce the same day. 3 weeks later, when I returned with the truth, every single face in the room turned pale. She's sleeping with him. With Grant. Her boss. I know she is. I stopped breathing. 10 feet from the kitchen doorway of my in-laws' house, arms full of Christmas gifts, 3 pregnancy tests wrapped in festive paper tucked inside my purse. And those were the words that shattered everything. My husband's voice. Matthew's voice. Cold and certain and wrong. Before we continue, thank you for being here. If you believe trust and truth matter in marriage, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach others who need to hear this. Now let's see what happened next. The shopping bags slipped from my hands, hitting the hardwood floor with a muffled thud that somehow no one in the kitchen heard over Frank Sinatra crooning about white Christmases and chestnuts roasting on open fires. I'd arrived 43 minutes early. 43 minutes that were supposed to be a gift. Extra time to surprise Matthew with the news we'd been praying for, hoping for, crying over for 2 solid years. The baby we'd wanted so desperately was finally real, finally growing inside me, finally ours. Except Matthew didn't know that yet. And now he was standing in his parents' kitchen on Christmas Eve, accusing me of infidelity. Let me back up. Because the last 6 weeks had been the strangest mixture of exhaustion and joy I'd ever experienced. Boston. The Harbor View Hotel Restoration Project. At 32 years old, it was the biggest opportunity of my architectural career. A historic landmark that needed complete structural redesign while preserving its 1920s character. Grant Chamberlain, my boss, had trusted me to lead the entire design team. 15 people reporting to me. Millions of dollars in budget. It was everything I'd worked toward since graduating from design school. But 3 weeks ago something shifted. I started waking up nauseous. Not violently sick, just this persistent queasiness that made coffee smell like gasoline and turned my favorite breakfast bagel into something I couldn't even look at. I was exhausted by 2 in the afternoon, struggling to keep my eyes open during client presentations. And I cried watching a dog food commercial in my hotel room. Actually cried over a golden retriever puppy reuniting with its owner. At first I blamed the stress. 80-hour work weeks will do that to you. The pressure of managing a team, dealing with contractors who didn't want to take direction from a woman, fighting with the Historical Preservation Board over every single design choice. Then I missed my period. I remember standing in the tiny bathroom of my extended stay hotel room, staring at my calendar app, counting days twice because I was sure I'd made a mistake. But I hadn't. I was 12 days late. I bought the first pregnancy test from a CVS 3 blocks from the hotel. Paid cash like I was buying something illegal. Took it back to my room and peed on the stick with shaking hands, then set a timer on my phone because I was too scared to just stand there watching it develop. 2 pink lines appeared before the timer even finished. I didn't trust it. Couldn't trust it. So I bought another test from a different pharmacy. A Walgreens this time, different brand, different cashier who wouldn't remember my face. That one was positive too. The third test I bought from a bodega that sold pregnancy tests next to lottery tickets and energy drinks. The cashier was a woman in her 60s who looked at me with kind eyes and said, "Congratulations, honey." I'd burst into tears right there at the counter. 3 positive tests. 3 separate confirmations of the thing Matthew and I had wanted for so long. We'd been trying for 2 years. 2 years of tracking my cycle, timing everything perfectly, monthly disappointments when my period arrived anyway. 2 years of watching friends announce pregnancies on social media while we smiled and congratulated them and went home to cry together. 2 years of doctor's appointments and fertility discussions and quiet conversations about whether we should consider other options. And now, finally, it had happened. But I was 3,000 miles away from my husband, living in a hotel room in Boston, working 16-hour days on a project I couldn't leave. And telling Matthew over the phone felt wrong. Like announcing something sacred through a screen instead of in person, where I could see his face light up, where we could hold each other and cry happy tears and start planning our future as parents. So I kept it secret. Made an appointment with a women's health clinic in Boston to confirm the pregnancy and make sure everything was developing normally. Charged it to our joint credit card because I had nothing to hide. It never occurred to me that Matthew would see the charges and create an entire conspiracy theory around them. I went to 3 appointments over the course of 3 weeks. Each time, Dr. Sarah Mitchell confirmed what I already knew. I was pregnant, approximately 9 weeks along, everything progressing normally. Each time, I left with more excitement and more impatience to tell Matthew in person. Christmas Eve was going to be perfect. I'd arrive at his parents' house, pull him aside before the party started, and give him the wrapped pregnancy tests. I'd practiced what I'd say 100 different ways. Sometimes simple, "We're having a baby." Sometimes elaborate, "I have an early Christmas present that's going to arrive in June." Sometimes just handing him the tests and watching his face as he figured it out. My flight from Boston was scheduled to land at 7:15, which would get me to the Thornton house by 7:30, perfect timing for the party at 8. But the flight left early and caught strong tailwinds. We landed at 6:30 instead. I was thrilled. It meant I'd have even more time alone with Matthew before his family arrived. Private time to share our news, to watch him process it, to hold each other before we had to share our joy with everyone else. The rental car drive from the airport was only 17 minutes. I spent the entire time checking my phone, resisting the urge to text Matthew that I was coming early. The surprise was too important. I wanted to see his face when I walked through that door. I pulled into the Thornton driveway at 6:47. Matthew's truck was parked out front, which meant he was already there helping his parents set up for the party. The 2-story colonial house was lit up against the December darkness, Christmas lights outlining the roof and windows, a wreath on the front door that Caroline had made herself from pine branches and red ribbon. This house held so much of our history. 5 Christmases celebrated here. Countless Sunday dinners where Caroline cooked too much food and sent us home with leftovers. The New Year's Eve party 7 years ago where Matthew had first kissed me at midnight. The Thanksgiving 3 years later when he told his parents he was going to propose. The engagement announcement dinner. Our wedding reception in the backyard. This was supposed to be where we announced we were having a baby. I grabbed the shopping bags from the trunk. Boston souvenirs I'd carefully selected for everyone. Lobster-shaped chocolates for Caroline because she loved quirky gifts. A vintage Patriots pennant for Robert because he'd been a fan since the 70s. A Red Sox cap for Matthew even though he was a die-hard Yankees fan, which made it the perfect teasing gift. The front door was unlocked. Family tradition. Caroline said locked doors made guests feel unwelcome, made them feel like they were intruding instead of joining a celebration. I stepped inside quietly, shopping bags rustling against my winter coat. The house smelled exactly right. Cinnamon from Caroline's famous cinnamon rolls that she made every Christmas Eve. Pine from the massive tree in the living room that probably violated fire codes with how many lights were strung on it. That specific scent of old house and family and home. Frank Sinatra was playing on the vintage record player Robert refused to replace. The Christmas tree dominated the living room, 15 feet tall, covered in ornaments I recognized from years of celebrations. The angel on top that Caroline's grandmother had brought from Italy. The handmade ornaments from Matthew's childhood. The first Christmas together ornament we'd bought our first year married. I could hear voices coming from the kitchen. Matthew's voice. I smiled, shifted the shopping bags to one arm and started walking toward the sound. I was going to interrupt them. Walk into that kitchen and surprise my husband and announce that our lives were about to change in the most beautiful way possible. But then I heard my name. And the way Matthew said it made me freeze. Aria's been acting strange for weeks. His voice had an edge I'd only heard a handful of times in 5 years of marriage. When he was dealing with contractors who'd screwed up a project. When he was frustrated and angry and trying to stay controlled. Secretive. Distant. She's been in Boston for 6 weeks and every time I call she sounds guilty. I stood there in the hallway between the living room and kitchen, bags cutting into my hands, not understanding what I was hearing. Caroline's voice soothing, "Matthew honey, you're imagining things. She's working hard. That hotel restoration is the biggest project of her career. She's sleeping with him." Matthew cut his mother off. "With Grant. Her boss. I know she is." The shopping bags fell from my hands. Grant Chamberlain was 53 years old. He'd been married to Patricia for 27 years. They had 2 kids in college. A daughter studying veterinary medicine at Cornell and a son doing engineering at MIT. Grant showed me pictures of them on his phone at least once a week, usually while telling some embarrassing dad story about their childhood. He called me kiddo. He sent me home early when I worked past 7 because he said young people needed work-life balance more than they needed overtime pay. 2 months ago he'd sat me down in his office and given me a 20-minute lecture about not sacrificing my marriage for my career, about how he'd almost lost Patricia in his 30s because he'd prioritized projects over date nights and forgotten that success meant nothing if you came home to an empty house. The idea of anything inappropriate between us wasn't just wrong. It was absurd. Impossible. Insulting. But Matthew kept talking and I kept standing there in that hallway listening to my husband build a case against me like he was some prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. Think about it, Dad. Matthew's voice had taken on this horrible reasonable tone, like he was explaining something obvious that everyone else was too blind to see. We haven't been intimate since August. Not once. She always has an excuse. Too tired, too stressed, headaches, work problems. And I tried. God knows I tried. But she kept pushing me away. That was true. We hadn't made love since that last weekend in August before we'd both left for our separate projects. But it wasn't because I was cheating. It was because I'd been exhausted from traveling back and forth to Boston for preliminary meetings. Because Matthew had been stressed about the Portland expansion falling behind schedule. Because we'd both been too tired to connect physically even though we still loved each other. At least I thought we still loved each other. And now she's in Boston for 6 weeks, Matthew continued. 6 weeks away from home working 16-hour days with Grant. They're together constantly. Every site visit, every client meeting, every design review. She talks about him in every phone call. Grant thinks this, Grant suggested that, Grant approved my proposal. I had talked about Grant a lot. Because he was my boss. Because his approval mattered for my career. Because when you're leading a major project you reference the person you report to. It was professional, not personal. But Matthew had taken every casual mention of Grant's name and turned it into evidence of an affair. Robert's voice cut through the kitchen, sharp and careful. Matthew, these are serious accusations. Do you have actual proof? Have you seen them together? Has anyone told you they're having an affair? I don't need someone to tell me. Matthew's voice went hard. I can feel it. I know my wife. Or I thought I did. She's been pulling away from me for months. Since September. She stops texting me back as quickly. Our phone calls got shorter. She sounds distracted when we talk, like she's thinking about something else. Someone else. I'd been distracted during our calls. Because I'd been nauseous and trying to hide it. Because I'd been researching pregnancy symptoms on my laptop while talking to him. Because I'd been planning how to surprise him with the news and trying not to accidentally reveal it too early. Everything Matthew was saying was technically true. But the conclusion he'd drawn was so wrong it felt like he was talking about a completely different person. Caroline spoke up and I could hear the tension in her voice. She was trying to defend me while also being careful not to completely dismiss her son's feelings. Sweetheart, I think you're reading too much into normal things. Aria's working on the biggest project of her career. Of course she's distracted and tired. That doesn't mean she's unfaithful. She's pregnant, Mom. The words came out flat. Final. My hand shot out to grab the wall because my knees went weak. The shopping bags I'd been holding had already fallen, scattered across the hardwood floor. The Patriots pennant half visible through torn wrapping paper, lobster chocolates spilled from their box. No one in the kitchen heard the noise. They were too focused on what Matthew had just said. How do you know she's pregnant? Robert's voice had gone very quiet. That was his tell. When Robert Thornton got quiet, it meant he was either very concerned or very angry, and you didn't want to be on the receiving end of either. I saw the credit card statement. Matthew's voice picked up momentum, like he'd been waiting to share this evidence. 3 charges to the same women's clinic in Boston. Boston Women's Health. October 15th, October 29th, November 12th. Different amounts. $175, $220, $195. I looked it up. Those are prenatal appointment costs. Initial visit, follow-up, ultrasound. The timeline matches perfectly. My prenatal appointments. The ones I'd scheduled to make sure the baby was healthy before I told Matthew. The ones I'd charged to our joint credit card because I had nothing to hide, because this baby was ours. Because I never imagined my husband would see medical bills and create a conspiracy theory instead of just asking me about them. And you think she's pregnant with another man's child because? Caroline's voice had an edge now. She was getting defensive on my behalf, and part of me loved her for it even as I stood frozen in that hallway unable to move or speak or breathe. Because we haven't slept together since August, Mom. Matthew said it like he was explaining something to a child. And she's getting prenatal care in November. Do the math. If she got pregnant in August, she would have known by September. She would have told me. She would have come home or asked me to come to Boston. She wouldn't be scheduling appointments 3,000 miles away from her husband unless she was hiding something. Unless the baby wasn't mine. The logic was wrong. Completely horrifically wrong. I'd gotten pregnant that last weekend in August. Dr. Mitchell had confirmed it based on fetal development. I'd found out 3 weeks ago in mid-November, which was perfectly normal timing. I'd scheduled the appointments in Boston because that's where I was, because it was convenient, because I planned to transfer to a doctor back home once I told Matthew and came back for good. But Matthew had taken the facts and twisted them into a narrative of betrayal that made a sick kind of sense if you were already convinced your wife was cheating on you. Have you asked her about these charges? Robert's voice was still quiet, which meant he was getting angrier. Have you had a single conversation with Arya about any of this? Why would I? Matthew shot back. So she can lie to my face? So she can spin some story about how these are just routine checkups or consultations or whatever excuse she comes up with. I'm not an idiot, Dad. I see the pattern. She stopped being intimate with me in August. Started acting weird in September. Took this Boston project in October. 6 weeks away from home, 16-hour days with her boss. Constant excuses for why she can't come home on weekends. And now she's pregnant and hiding it from me. What conclusion am I supposed to draw? Caroline made a sound that might have been a sob or a protest. Matthew, honey, you're making a terrible mistake. What are you going to do? Robert interrupted, his voice dangerously calm. There was a pause. I could hear someone moving in the kitchen, maybe pacing. Then Matthew spoke again and his voice had changed. Gone cold. Methodical. Decided. I already did it. My heart stopped. I called Richard Morrison this morning. Filed for divorce. Drew up the papers, signed everything, made it official. Arya doesn't know yet. She thinks she's coming home to a Christmas party and a happy family. Oh, no. I'm having the papers served when she arrives tonight, Matthew continued. Right here. In front of everyone. I want her to know that I'm not some fool she can manipulate. I want her to see that I know the truth. That I'm not going to sit around and raise another man's child while she pretends our marriage is fine. Caroline's voice went sharp. Matthew James Thornton, you cannot be serious. I'm completely serious. The process server is scheduled for 7:30. Arya lands at 7:15. Perfect timing. She walks in thinking everything's normal and instead she gets divorce papers. Public. Documented. Final. She doesn't get to control this narrative. She doesn't get to spin this her way. My hand found my phone in my coat pocket. My fingers moved automatically, muscle memory, typing out a text to Matthew even though I couldn't see the screen through the tears that had started falling without my permission. Flight delayed. Going to be about 45 minutes late. Start without me. Love you. I hit send before I could think about it. Before I could process what I was doing. The response came within seconds. I heard the phone chime in the kitchen. It's Arya, Matthew said. I could hear him reading the text aloud. Flight delayed. Going to be about 45 minutes late. Start without me. Love you. He said those last 2 words. Love you, with something that sounded like contempt. There it is, he said. Another lie. Another excuse. She's probably not even at the airport. Probably at Grant's apartment or some hotel, trying to buy herself more time before she has to face me. Drive safe, he texted back. I stared at those 2 words on my screen. Drive safe. He was planning to serve me divorce papers in front of his entire family in 45 minutes. And he was telling me to drive safe like everything was normal. Like he was a concerned husband worried about his wife traveling in winter weather. I backed away from the kitchen on legs that didn't feel like my own. My shoulder hit the doorframe. My foot caught on one of the fallen shopping bags. I didn't care. I walked back through that living room where we'd celebrated so many Christmases, past the tree covered in our shared history, past the mantle holding photos of our wedding and anniversary parties and family gatherings. I walked out the front door into the December cold and stood on the porch where Matthew had kissed me under mistletoe 3 years ago. And I pulled out my phone again. There was only one person I could call. One person who might understand. One person who knew both of us well enough to tell me if I was losing my mind or if my husband had already lost his. The phone rang twice before David answered. Arya. His voice was tight, stressed, wrong. Where are you? Sitting in the driveway, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. At your house. About to be served divorce papers. The silence on David's end stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then I heard him exhale, long and shaky. You know. It wasn't a question. I heard everything, I said. Got here early. Wanted to surprise Matthew. Instead I got to hear him tell his parents I'm pregnant with my boss's baby and that he's filing for divorce. Arya. David's voice cracked. Jesus. I'm so sorry. Matthew called me this morning. Told me what he was planning. I swear to God I tried to talk him out of it. I told him he was being insane, that he needed to talk to you first, that he was making assumptions based on nothing. But he wouldn't listen. I watched the Thornton house through the windshield, saw shadows moving behind the kitchen curtains. Matthew was probably still in there, still building his case against me to parents who were trying to talk sense into him. He's convinced himself of this whole story, David continued. He's taken every little thing, the distance, the work stress, the credit card charges, and woven it into this narrative where you're the villain. Nothing I said could change his mind. He kept saying he could feel it, that he knew, that all the evidence pointed to an affair. The baby is his, David. My voice broke on the words. The baby is his. We conceived in late August, that last weekend before we both left. I haven't been with anyone else. I would never. I stopped, pressed my hand against my mouth because I was about to start sobbing and I couldn't afford to fall apart yet. I believe you, David said immediately. Of course I believe you. But Matthew's not thinking straight. He's been spiraling for weeks. The Portland project is falling behind schedule and his company's threatening to pull him off it. His dad keeps making comments about grandchildren. James announced Sarah's pregnancy last month and Matthew's been weird about it ever since. And then you're in Boston and distant and he created this conspiracy in his head and now he can't see past it. I closed my eyes. Matthew's younger brother James. His wife Sarah. They'd announced their pregnancy at Thanksgiving dinner. 12 weeks along, due in June. Everyone had been so happy for them. I'd watched Matthew smile and congratulate them, but I'd also seen something flash across his face. Something dark that I'd dismissed as stress but now realized might have been jealousy or inadequacy or both. And I'd been keeping my own pregnancy secret. Waiting to tell him in person. Not knowing he was interpreting my silence as betrayal. What do I do? I asked David. Do I go in there? Let him serve me papers in front of everyone? Try to defend myself against accusations I shouldn't have to defend against? You have two choices, David said carefully. You can go in there tonight, face this on Matthew's terms, defend yourself in front of his family while he's already decided you're guilty. Or you can leave. Regroup. Get proof. Come back when you're ready to fight this on your terms, not his. The first option made my stomach turn. Walking into that house. Matthew's cold eyes. His parents watching. Being handed divorce papers like I was some stranger being served a lawsuit. Having to defend my character, my fidelity, my love while carrying our child and no one believing me because Matthew had already poisoned them against me. The second option felt smarter. Colder. More strategic. What kind of proof would I need? Medical records, David said without hesitation. Conception timeline from your doctor. Something that shows conclusively when this baby was conceived. Something Matthew can't deny or dismiss or twist into his narrative. I thought about Dr. Mitchell. About the ultrasound images. About the detailed timeline she'd shown me of fetal development that pinpointed conception to late August with medical precision. I need 3 weeks, I said. What are you thinking? I'm thinking I'm going to get every piece of evidence that proves this baby is Matthew's. Medical records. Conception timeline. Witness statements from Grant and his wife. Work calendar showing I was never alone with him inappropriately. Phone records proving I've been calling Matthew regularly, being transparent. Everything. I'm going to document every single thing so when I come back here, Matthew can't twist the truth anymore. David was quiet for a long moment. When you come back it's going to get ugly. It's already ugly, I said. I'm just making sure the truth is uglier than his lies. Okay. David's voice steadied. Hey. I'll help however I can. I'll tell Matthew your flight got cancelled. I'll buy you the time you need. But Arya? When you do this, when you come back with all that evidence, you need to be prepared for what happens next. This isn't just about proving him wrong. This is about whether your marriage can survive him not trusting you enough to ask before accusing. I knew that. God, I knew that. But I pushed it aside because I couldn't think about that yet. Couldn't process what it meant that my husband had chosen paranoia over a simple conversation. 3 weeks, I repeated. I'll call you if I need anything. I hung up before David could say anything else. My fingers moved automatically, typing out another text to Matthew. Flight completely cancelled. Storm system moving in. All Boston flights grounded. I'm so sorry. I'll try to get home tomorrow. Merry Christmas. I love you. The response took longer this time. Long enough that I wondered if he'd stopped believing my excuses entirely. Then my phone buzzed. Disappointing but not surprising. Merry Christmas. Not surprising. Because he thought I was lying. Thought I was making excuses to avoid him. Thought I was probably at Grant's apartment or some hotel room, choosing my lover over my husband on Christmas Eve. I started the car and drove. Not toward home. The house Matthew and I had bought together felt contaminated now, like going there would mean stepping into a trap. Instead I drove to a Hampton Inn 20 minutes away, far enough that I wouldn't accidentally run into anyone from Matthew's family, close enough that I could get back quickly if I needed to. The lobby was nearly empty. Just a tired-looking desk clerk and a family with 2 small kids who were arguing about whether Santa could find them at a hotel. I need a room, I told the clerk. Just for tonight. Maybe longer. Name. I hesitated. Then, Aria Castellano. My maiden name. The name I'd had before I married Matthew, before I became Aria Thornton, before my entire identity became wrapped up in being someone's wife. The clerk handed me a key card to room 237. I took it, rode the elevator up alone, and stepped into a generic beige room that smelled like industrial cleaner and old carpet. I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out a notebook from my purse, the one I used for project planning at work. Opened to a blank page. Stared at it for a long moment. Then I started writing. Evidence needed. 1. Complete prenatal records from Dr. Sarah Mitchell, Boston Women's Health. 2. Conception date confirmation with ultrasound dating. 3. Credit card statements showing Boston clinic charges, already have. 4. Work emails / calendar proving Grant and I were never alone inappropriately. 5. Phone records showing regular calls to Matthew, evidence of transparency. 6. Character witnesses, Grant, his wife Patricia, Boston colleagues. 7. Legal consultation defamation and false accusations. 8. Documentation of Grant's whereabouts during alleged affair. By midnight I had a plan. Appointment scheduled. A timeline mapped out. Dr. Mitchell's office first thing Monday morning. A lawyer consultation Tuesday. A private investigator Wednesday to document Grant's activities and alibi for any dates Matthew might claim we were together. I wasn't fighting for divorce. I was fighting for truth. And when I walked back into the Thornton house in 3 weeks, I would make absolutely certain that everyone in that room understood what Matthew had done to his wife and child based on nothing but paranoid delusion. Christmas Day I stayed in that hotel room. I ordered room service, scrambled eggs that I could barely stomach through the pregnancy nausea. I called my mother and lied, told her I wasn't feeling well, that I was staying in Boston an extra week to rest before traveling. She believed me because why wouldn't she? I'd never given her reason to doubt me before. I called Grant at 2 in the afternoon. He answered on the 3rd ring, sounding confused. Aria? Everything okay? I thought you were heading home for Christmas. I need a favor, I said. A big one. I explained everything. Matthew's accusations. The divorce papers. The timeline of my pregnancy that Matthew had twisted into evidence of infidelity. Grant went completely silent and for a horrible moment I thought the call had dropped. Then, he thinks we're having an affair. Yes. He thinks, Aria, I'm old enough to be your father. I have kids your age. Patricia and I have been married for 27 years. How could he possibly? I need you and Patricia to write statements, I interrupted gently, confirming our professional relationship. Your calendar records showing we were never alone together outside of work. Anything that proves this is all in Matthew's head. Grant made a sound that might have been anger or disbelief or both. Of course. Absolutely. Whatever you need. This is insane, Aria. I'm so sorry you're dealing with this. Patricia called an hour later. I could hear the fury in her voice before she even said hello. Grant told me what Matthew accused you of. That boy has lost his mind. I've met Matthew. We've had him and you over for dinner. He's seen us together. How dare he create this fantasy about my husband having an affair with you? I need evidence, I said. Statements. Documentation. Something Matthew can't twist or dismiss. You'll have it, Patricia promised. I'll personally document every single interaction Grant had with you in Boston. Every meeting, every site visit, every coffee break. Matthew's going to regret ever doubting you. The next 3 weeks became a blur of systematic evidence gathering. Dr. Mitchell's office Monday morning, where I sat in an examination room and explained why I needed detailed medical documentation of my pregnancy timeline. Dr. Mitchell was horrified. Angry on my behalf in a way that made me want to cry with gratitude. Your husband thinks you're carrying another man's child based on credit card charges? She shook her head. That's not how marriage should work, Arya. You shouldn't have to prove your fidelity with medical records. But she gave me everything anyway. A complete report showing conception window August 20th through 26th based on fetal development. Confirmation that my pregnancy timeline was perfectly consistent with my first prenatal visit. Documentation of every appointment, every test, every piece of medical evidence that proved this baby was conceived exactly when and how I said it was. I built my case piece by piece. Medical records. Work calendars. Email logs. Phone records showing I'd called Matthew nearly every night from Boston. And with each piece of evidence I gathered, I felt myself changing. Hardening. Becoming someone who documented and strategized instead of someone who trusted and loved freely. I wasn't sure I liked who I was becoming. But I was certain I needed to be her to survive what came next. On Tuesday morning, I walked into Jennifer Hartman's office building feeling like I was preparing for battle instead of trying to save my marriage. The law firm occupied the 8th floor of a downtown high-rise. One of those places with marble floors and glass walls and furniture that cost more than most people's cars. The receptionist directed me to a corner office where Jennifer Hartman sat behind a massive mahogany desk covered in case files and legal journals. She was younger than I expected. Maybe 40, with dark hair pulled back in a sleek bun and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She stood when I entered, shook my hand with a firm grip, and gestured to the leather chair across from her desk. Mrs. Thornton. Thank you for coming in. Can I get you anything? Water, coffee, tea. Water would be good, I said because my mouth was dry and I'd already had 2 cups of coffee that morning trying to calm my nerves. Jennifer poured water from a glass pitcher into a crystal glass and set it in front of me. Then she sat back down, pulled out a yellow legal pad and clicked her pen. Tell me everything, she said. From the beginning. So I did. I told her about Boston and the pregnancy and the secret I'd been keeping. About arriving early on Christmas Eve and hearing Matthew accuse me of infidelity. About the divorce papers he'd filed, the public humiliation he'd planned, the narrative he'd built in his head based on credit card charges and paranoia. Jennifer took notes without interrupting. Her face stayed professionally neutral, but I saw her eyebrows rise slightly when I mentioned Matthew planning to serve me papers in front of his family. When I finished, she set her pen down and studied me with those sharp eyes. You have grounds for a defamation suit if he's made these accusations publicly, she said. Telling his parents you're having an affair with your boss, claiming you're pregnant with another man's child. That's defamatory. You also have grounds for emotional distress claims. The mental anguish of being falsely accused, the stress during pregnancy, the damage to your professional reputation if word gets out. We could build a strong case. I took a sip of water. I don't want to sue him. I just want to prove he's wrong. Jennifer leaned forward, elbows on her desk. Arya, I have to ask you something and I need you to be honest with yourself when you answer. Are you sure you want to fight for this marriage? A man who would accuse you of infidelity without asking you first, who would file for divorce without a single conversation, who would plan to humiliate you publicly at a family gathering. That's not a man who trusts you. That's not a man who respects you. Is that really what you want to fight to keep? The question landed in my chest like a stone. I'd been so focused on gathering evidence, on proving Matthew wrong, on showing him the truth that I hadn't stopped to ask myself the deeper question. Did I want to stay married to someone who thought so little of me? He's scared, I heard myself say. His brother just announced a pregnancy. His father keeps making comments about grandchildren. Matthew's been struggling with the Portland project and feeling inadequate. I think he convinced himself I was leaving him because some part of him believed he deserved to be left. Jennifer's expression didn't change. That explains his behavior. It doesn't excuse it. Fear and insecurity might explain why he created this narrative, but they don't justify what he did to you. You understand that, right? I did. God help me, I did. But there was still a part of me, the part that remembered Matthew proposing in that karaoke bar, the part that had stood beside him at our wedding, the part that was carrying his child, that wanted to believe we could fix this. I need the evidence first, I said. I need to show him he's wrong. Then we can deal with whether the marriage is worth saving. Jennifer looked at me for a long moment like she was trying to decide whether to push harder or let it go. Finally, she nodded and opened a folder on her desk. Everything you need is here, she said, sliding it across to me. Sample documentation for medical timeline, template for witness statements, guidance on what kind of evidence will be most effective. I've also included information on your legal options if you decide you want to pursue defamation or emotional distress claims later. She paused, then added more quietly, but Arya? Think carefully about what you're fighting for. Because proving him wrong and saving your marriage aren't necessarily the same thing. I took the folder and left her office with those words echoing in my head. Wednesday afternoon, I met Grant and Patricia at a small coffee shop 3 blocks from the Harborview Hotel. It was one of those independent places with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. The kind of spot where Grant and I had grabbed coffee a dozen times during the project, always with other team members, always talking about work. Grant saw me first. He stood up from the table he'd claimed in the back corner, and I saw how tired he looked. How worried. Patricia was with him. She stood too, and before I could say anything she pulled me into a hug. That boy has lost his mind, she said fiercely. Absolutely lost his mind. We sat down. Grant had already ordered me a decaf latte. He remembered I'd switched to decaf weeks ago, though at the time I'd blamed it on trying to sleep better. Now I realized he'd probably noticed the pregnancy signs I thought I was hiding. The tiredness. The way I'd stopped drinking the office coffee. The crackers I kept at my desk. I've been thinking about this nonstop since you called, Grant said. Trying to figure out how Matthew could possibly think. He stopped, shook his head. I've treated you like a daughter, Arya. I thought I'd made that clear. I thought everyone knew Patricia and I see you like our kids. He doesn't know you, I said quietly. Not really. He's met you a few times at company events, seen us together briefly. But he doesn't know how you talk about your children or how you lecture me about work-life balance, or how you sent me home early 3 times last month because you were worried I was working too hard. Patricia pulled out a folder from her bag. Apparently everyone was documenting everything with folders now. I've written a complete timeline of every interaction Grant had with you in Boston, she said. Every dinner we all had together, every time you came to our house, every team meeting. I've also included our credit card statements showing Grant and I had dinner together every single night you were supposedly having an affair with him. Grant added his own folder to the pile. Notarized statement from me. Calendar records showing my schedule. Confirmation that you and I were never alone together outside of professional settings. Letters from 3 other team members who worked with us daily and can confirm our relationship was completely professional. I took both folders, feeling the weight of them in my hands. Thank you. Both of you. I'm sorry you have to do this. I'm sorry Matthew's paranoia is dragging you into our mess. Don't apologize, Patricia said firmly. You didn't do anything wrong. Matthew did. And when you show him all this evidence, he's going to realize what a terrible mistake he made. I wanted to believe that. Wanted to believe that proof would be enough to break through Matthew's delusion and bring back the man I'd married. But a small voice in the back of my head, the one that sounded suspiciously like Jennifer Hartman, whispered that proving him wrong and fixing what he'd broken weren't the same thing. Thursday morning I met with Tom Fletcher. The private investigator came recommended by Jennifer's firm, a former police detective who now specialized in gathering evidence for divorce cases and corporate investigations. He met me at a diner near my hotel, slid into the booth across from me with a manila envelope that had become depressingly familiar over the past week. Your boss is exactly what he appears to be, Tom said without preamble. Faithful husband. Professional colleague. There's nothing here that suggests anything inappropriate. He pulled documents from the envelope one by one. Credit card statements showing Grant had dinner with Patricia every night during the time Matthew thought we were having an affair. No suspicious hotel charges. No unexplained cash withdrawals. Security footage from the Harborview Hotel showing Grant and me in conference rooms on construction sites, always with other people present. Phone records showing Grant called Patricia every evening between 7 and 8, calls lasting 20 to 40 minutes. I also talked to the hotel staff, Tom continued. The concierge, the restaurant servers, the housekeeping supervisor. Everyone remembers seeing Mr. Chamberlain with his wife regularly. No one ever saw him with you outside of professional context. No one noticed anything that would suggest an affair. He pushed the final page across the table. A summary report with his professional opinion stated clearly at the bottom. No evidence found to support allegations of infidelity between Aria Thornton and Grant Chamberlain. All documented interactions are consistent with a professional working relationship. I paid Tom his fee, money from our joint account, which felt like some kind of bitter irony. Using our money to prove I hadn't betrayed our marriage. Can I give you some advice? Tom asked as I was gathering the documents. Off the record? I nodded. I've worked a lot of divorce cases. A lot of infidelity investigations. And the ones that hurt the most aren't the ones where someone actually cheated. They're the ones where someone was falsely accused. Because cheating is a choice someone makes. But false accusations, those reveal something deeper. They reveal that the person who's supposed to trust you most in the world doesn't. And that's a lot harder to come back from. He stood up, left cash on the table for his coffee and walked away. I sat there in that diner booth surrounded by evidence of my innocence, wondering if Tom was right. Wondering if the damage Matthew had done was too deep to repair even after I proved him wrong. My phone buzzed. A text from David. * Matthew's been asking about you. Wants to know if I've heard from you. What should I tell him? *. I stared at that message for a long time before responding. * Tell him I'll be home soon. Tell him we need to talk. Tell him he should prepare himself for the truth. *. Then I added one more folder to my growing collection of evidence and started planning exactly how I was going to walk back into that house and make Matthew face what he'd done. David called me on a Friday night, 11 days into my self-imposed exile. I was sitting in my hotel room reviewing all the evidence I'd gathered, organizing it into categories: medical, professional, financial, testimonial, when my phone lit up with his name. I need to tell you something, he said without preamble. Something about Matthew. Something that might help you understand why he lost his mind like this. I set down the folder I'd been holding and pressed the phone closer to my ear. I'm listening. Do you remember Thanksgiving dinner? At the Thornton house. I did. Matthew and I had both been there taking a break from our respective projects. It had been one of the last times we'd felt like a normal couple, sitting around Caroline's dining table with the whole family, eating too much turkey and pretending everything was fine. Robert made a comment. David continued. About grandchildren. He was talking to James and Sarah about the baby, and then he looked at Matthew and said something like, well, at least someone's giving us grandkids. Matthew and Aria are too busy with their careers to think about family. I closed my eyes. I hadn't heard that comment. I'd been in the kitchen helping Caroline with dessert. But I could imagine how it had landed on Matthew. How it would have felt like confirmation of every inadequacy he'd been carrying. It was supposed to be a joke, David said. You know how Robert is. He doesn't think before he speaks sometimes. But Matthew took it hard. I saw his face. Saw something shut down in him. Why didn't you tell me? Because Matthew asked me not to. Said he didn't want you to feel bad about it. Said it wasn't a big deal. David's voice went rough. But then a week later, James and Sarah announced their pregnancy. 12 weeks along. Due in June. And Caroline cried. Like actually cried with happiness. And Robert kept talking about how excited he was to be a grandfather, how James was giving them such a gift. I remembered that announcement. Remembered the way Matthew had smiled and congratulated his brother. Remembered thinking he seemed a little off, a little distant, but I'd blamed it on work stress. Matthew's been comparing himself to James his whole life, David said quietly. James was the better athlete. James got better grades. James got the bigger promotion at his company. And now James was giving their parents grandchildren while Matthew was still childless after 5 years of marriage. We were trying, I said, voice breaking. We'd been trying for 2 years. I know. But Matthew didn't see it that way. He saw failure. And when you went to Boston and started acting distant, when you stopped answering his calls as quickly, when you sounded distracted during conversations, he convinced himself you were pulling away because he wasn't good enough. So he created a story where I was cheating. It was easier to believe you were unfaithful than to believe you just didn't want him anymore. David exhaled slowly. The affair narrative gave him something to blame. Someone to be angry at. It was better than sitting with the possibility that he simply wasn't enough for you. I thought about that. About Matthew's mind creating an entire conspiracy because facing his own inadequacy was too painful. It didn't excuse what he'd done, but it explained it in a way that made my heart ache instead of just burn with anger. There's something else, David said. Matthew's been seeing a therapist. Started in November, right after James's announcement. That stopped me cold. What? He didn't tell you because he was embarrassed. Thought it made him look weak. But he's been going every week. Trying to work through his depression, his feelings of inadequacy, his fear that he's failing at everything that matters. Matthew had been in therapy for 6 weeks and never said a word to me. We'd been so disconnected, so buried in our own separate struggles, that I'd completely missed the fact that my husband was falling apart. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd been keeping the pregnancy secret to protect the surprise. He'd been keeping his therapy secret to protect his pride. We'd both been hiding things from each other in the name of love, and those secrets had nearly destroyed us. I thought you should know, David said. Before you go back there with all your evidence. Before you confront him. I thought you should understand that this wasn't just paranoia. It was pain. And fear. And a broken man who convinced himself the worst possible story because he couldn't face the truth. That he was struggling and needed help. We hung up shortly after. I sat there in my hotel room staring at the evidence folders spread across the bed, seeing them differently now. On the 13th day Caroline called. I'd been avoiding her calls since Christmas Eve, letting them go to voicemail, not ready to talk to Matthew's family until I had all my evidence gathered and my strategy planned. But something made me answer this time. Maybe David's revelation about Matthew's therapy. Maybe just loneliness and the need to hear a voice that had once felt like family. Arya, sweetheart. Caroline's voice was thick with tears. Please tell me what Matthew said isn't true. What did he tell you? That you're not coming home. That you've confirmed you want the divorce. That you're staying in Boston with. She stopped, couldn't finish the sentence. Anger flashed through me, hot and immediate. Matthew was still lying, still building his narrative, still making me the villain in a story I'd never agreed to be part of. That's not true, I said, voice harder than I intended. None of it's true. I'm gathering evidence to prove the baby is Matthew's. I'm coming home when I'm ready. And I never wanted this divorce. Matthew filed for it without ever asking me if the charges he saw on our credit card were what he thought they were. There was a long silence on Caroline's end. Then very quietly, he's been struggling, Arya. Did you know he's been seeing someone? A therapist. David told me. Yesterday. He started after Thanksgiving. After James's announcement. He's been dealing with depression, with feelings that he's not good enough, that he's failing everyone who matters. Caroline's voice cracked. I think some part of him convinced himself you were leaving because he believed he deserved to be left. I pressed my hand against my forehead, trying to push back the headache that was building behind my eyes. That doesn't excuse what he did, Caroline. It explains it. But it doesn't make it okay. I know. God, I know. What he did was terrible. Unforgivable. But Arya, he loves you. He's just so broken right now that he can't see past his own fear. We talked for 20 more minutes. Caroline told me about finding Matthew sitting in our old bedroom at their house, staring at our wedding photos. About him barely eating, barely sleeping. About the way he'd withdrawn from everyone since Christmas Eve, convinced he'd lost me forever. Part of me felt vindicated. Good. He should suffer. He should feel a fraction of the pain he'd caused me. But another part, the part that still remembered falling in love with him, that still carried his child, just felt sad. On the 15th day I drove to our house. I still had my keys. Matthew was at work. I'd confirmed with David before going. The house felt wrong the moment I stepped inside. Cold despite the heat being on. Empty despite being full of our furniture and belongings. Like it knew something had broken that couldn't be easily fixed. I walked through rooms that held 5 years of marriage. The living room where we'd binged entire TV series on lazy Sundays. The kitchen where Matthew had tried to cook me anniversary dinners that always ended with us ordering takeout because he'd burned something. The guest room we'd been planning to turn into a nursery. Our bedroom looked exactly how I'd left it 3 weeks ago. Bed made. My books still on the nightstand. Matthew's side of the closet still full of clothes. His journal sat on his nightstand. I'd never read Matthew's journal. He'd kept one since college. Told me once it helped him process his thoughts, work through problems on paper before they became overwhelming in his head. I'd always respected his privacy, never even been tempted to look. But I opened it now. The last entry was dated 2 days ago. Day 17 without Arya. David says she's okay, just needs time. But I know the truth. I destroyed everything. Filed for divorce before ever asking her to explain. Planned to humiliate her publicly. What kind of husband does that? What kind of man? That's right. I'm a failure. Failed at giving them grandchildren. Failed at keeping my wife. Failed at trusting the one person who deserved my trust most. I flipped backward. Found the entry from November 12th. Saw the clinic charges again today. $195 this time. Third appointment. She's definitely pregnant. And she hasn't told me. 3 months we've been apart and she hasn't said a word. Why would she hide this unless the baby isn't mine? Unless she's planning to leave me for him? October 29th. Arya sounded distant on the phone tonight. Said she was tired. But I heard something else in her voice. Guilt? Fear that I'm figuring it out? I saw the credit card charge yesterday. Boston Women's Health, $220. I looked it up. It's an OB/GYN clinic. Is she pregnant? And if she is, why isn't she telling me? October 3rd. James and Sarah are having a baby. Mom cried. Actual tears of joy. Dad couldn't stop smiling. And I sat there thinking about how I failed them. 5 years married and nothing to show for it. Arya and I tried for 2 years and it never happened. Maybe we're not meant to be parents. Maybe I'm not meant to be a father. Maybe that's why Arya seems so distant lately. She's realized she married the wrong brother. September 15th. Called Arya tonight. She sounded exhausted. Said the Boston project is overwhelming. But I wonder if she's just tired of me. Tired of this marriage. Tired of pretending we're happy when we both know something's broken between us. I read those entries and felt something shift in my chest. This wasn't just paranoia. This was pain. Depression. A man who'd convinced himself he was failing at everything that mattered, interpreting every piece of neutral evidence through that lens of inadequacy. It didn't excuse what he'd done. Didn't make the divorce filing okay. Didn't erase the public humiliation he'd planned. But it helped me understand. We'd both been keeping secrets. Both been protecting ourselves. Both been so focused on not burdening the other that we'd stopped communicating entirely. I took photos of the journal entries with my phone. Added them to my evidence file. Not as proof of my innocence, I had plenty of that. But as proof of Matthew's state of mind. Of the depression and inadequacy that had driven him to create a conspiracy where none existed. Then I put the journal back exactly where I'd found it and walked out of that house feeling more certain than ever about what I needed to do. I needed to go back. To confront Matthew. To show him the truth. And then we'd have to decide if the truth was enough to rebuild what his fear had destroyed. I called Caroline on the morning of the 21st day. I need to speak to the family, I said without preamble. All of them. Matthew, you, Robert, James, Sarah. David too if he's available. Today. This afternoon. There was a pause on her end. Then, what time? 2 o'clock. I have something important to say and it needs to be said in front of everyone. Arya, sweetheart. 2 o'clock, Caroline. Please make sure they're all there. She agreed. Her voice was shaking when she hung up. I spent the next 3 hours getting ready. Not physically. I'd been ready for days, my evidence organized into manila folders, my presentation rehearsed until I could recite it in my sleep. But emotionally, mentally, preparing myself to walk back into that house and face the man who'd accused me of the worst betrayal imaginable. At 1:30 I loaded everything into my rental car. The medical records. The witness statements. The private investigator's report. The ultrasound images. The pregnancy tests I'd wrapped in Christmas paper 3 weeks ago, still in their festive packaging, a gift that had never been opened. The drive to the Thornton house took 17 minutes. The same 17 minutes it had taken on Christmas Eve when I'd been excited and hopeful and completely unprepared for what I was about to hear. This time I knew exactly what was waiting for me. I pulled into the driveway at 1:57. Matthew's truck was there. So was James's SUV, David's sedan, and two other cars I didn't immediately recognize. Caroline had done what I'd asked. Gathered the family. Prepared them for whatever I was about to say. I sat in my car for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, breathing slowly. The baby, our baby, shifted inside me. Still too early to feel properly medically speaking, but I swore I felt it anyway. Felt the life we'd created together, the innocent party in all of this mess. At exactly 2 o'clock I got out of the car. The front door opened before I could knock. Caroline stood there, eyes red from crying, arms opening to pull me into a hug the moment I stepped inside. "Oh, honey," she whispered against my hair. "We've been so worried." I let her hold me for a moment. Then I gently pulled back. "Where is everyone?" "Living room. Waiting for you." I walked through that familiar hallway carrying my bag full of evidence, past the Christmas tree that looked sadder now, ornaments drooping slightly, a few needles scattered on the floor beneath it. The house smelled different than it had on Christmas Eve. Less like cinnamon and celebration. More like tension and fear. The living room was full. Robert sat in his usual armchair looking older than I'd ever seen him. James and Sarah occupied the couch, her hand gripped tightly in his. David stood near the doorway, positioned like he might need to intervene in whatever was about to happen. And Matthew stood by the fireplace, arms crossed defensively over his chest, jaw tight with tension. He'd lost weight. I could see it in his face, in the way his shirt hung looser on his frame. His eyes had dark circles underneath them, and his hair looked like he'd been running his hands through it obsessively. Good, some bitter part of me thought. Let him suffer. Our eyes met across the room. I saw suspicion there. Fear. And buried underneath everything else, something that looked like desperate hope. I walked to the center of the living room and set my bag down on the coffee table. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked loudly in the silence. "Thank you for coming," I said, looking at each person individually. James, Sarah, David, Robert, Caroline, finally Matthew. I know this is unusual, but what I have to say needs to be said in front of everyone who matters. Because 3 weeks ago Matthew made accusations about me that involved this entire family. And now everyone deserves to hear the truth. Matthew's jaw clenched. His arms tightened across his chest. I opened my bag and pulled out the first item. The pregnancy test. Still wrapped in Christmas paper, red and green snowflakes on white background. A small bow on top that had gotten crushed during my hasty exit on Christmas Eve. I set it on the coffee table where everyone could see it. 3 weeks ago, I said, voice steady and clear, I arrived at this house 43 minutes early. I'd caught an earlier flight from Boston because I couldn't wait any longer to see Matthew. Because I had news. The best news. News I'd been keeping secret for 3 weeks because I wanted to tell him in person, to see his face when he found out. I unwrapped the pregnancy test slowly, deliberately. Let the festive paper fall away to reveal the white plastic stick with its 2 unmistakable pink lines. Caroline made a small sound. Her hand went to her mouth. "I was pregnant," I continued. "I am pregnant. 14 weeks now. Due in late June." Robert's hand went to his chest. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. James looked at his brother with an expression I couldn't quite read. Matthew didn't move. Didn't react. Just stared at the pregnancy test like he was seeing a ghost. "But I didn't get to tell Matthew that night," I said. "Because when I walked into this house early, when I came through that front door ready to surprise my husband with the gift we'd been praying for, I heard him tell you," I looked at Caroline and Robert, "that I was pregnant with my boss's baby. That I'd been having an affair. That he was filing for divorce and planning to serve me papers in front of everyone at the Christmas party." The silence in the room was absolute. Even the clock seemed to stop ticking. "So I left," I said simply. "I didn't let him serve me. I didn't defend myself against accusations I shouldn't have to defend against. Instead, I spent 3 weeks gathering evidence. Proof. Documentation that would show beyond any doubt that Matthew was wrong." I pulled out the next folder. Dr. Mitchell's report. Opened it so everyone could see the medical letterhead, the detailed timeline, the ultrasound images. "This is from my obstetrician in Boston, Dr. Sarah Mitchell." It shows the conception window for this pregnancy based on fetal development. August 20th through 26th. The weekend before Matthew left for Portland and I left for Boston. The weekend we spent together in our home, in our bed, reconnecting before our temporary separation. I spread the ultrasound images across the coffee table. Black and white images of our baby, tiny and perfect. Measurements and dates printed clearly on each one. Caroline was crying openly now. Robert had his arm around her shoulders. Matthew's hands were shaking. He took a step toward the coffee table, then stopped like he was afraid to get closer. I charged my prenatal appointments to our joint credit card, I said, pulling out the bank statements next. Because I had nothing to hide. Because this baby is ours. Because I never imagined my husband would see medical bills and create a conspiracy theory instead of just asking me what they were for. I laid out Grant's notarized statement. Patricia's witness account. The private investigator's report. My work calendar showing every meeting, every site visit, every hour of every day I'd spent in Boston. Grant Chamberlain is 53 years old, I said, looking directly at Matthew now. He's been married to Patricia for 27 years. He has 2 children in college. He treats me like a daughter. He calls me kiddo and sends me home early when I work too late and literally lectured me about work-life balance 2 months ago. The idea that we're having an affair isn't just wrong, Matthew. It's insulting to both of us and to his wife. I picked up the phone records next. Page after page of calls from my Boston number to Matthew's cell. I called you almost every night, I said. Sometimes you answered and we talked for 5 minutes before you said you were tired. Sometimes you let it go to voicemail. But I called. Because I missed you. Because I loved you. Because even when I was exhausted and nauseous and hiding pregnancy symptoms, I wanted to hear your voice. Matthew's face had gone completely white. Bloodless. His hands weren't just shaking now, his whole body was trembling. This baby is yours, I said, voice cracking for the first time. Ours. Conceived in love. Conceived in our bed. Conceived when we were still happy and still trusted each other. I pulled out the last document. The divorce papers Matthew had filed. Set them on the coffee table next to the ultrasound image of our child. But you didn't trust me, I said softly. You didn't trust 5 years of marriage. You didn't trust the vows we made to each other. You saw credit card charges and created an entire narrative of betrayal without ever once asking me to explain. Without ever considering that maybe I had a good reason for those appointments. Without ever giving me the benefit of the doubt. Matthew reached for the ultrasound image with shaking hands. Picked it up carefully like it might break. Stared at the grainy black and white image of our daughter. Because I knew now it was a girl. Dr. Mitchell had told me at my last appointment, information I'd been saving to share with Matthew on Christmas. You filed for divorce, I continued, looking at the papers. Hired a lawyer. Planned to serve me in front of your entire family on Christmas Eve. You were ready to destroy our marriage, destroy our family, destroy me, all based on assumption and paranoia and insecurity. Caroline was sobbing. James had his arm around Sarah, who was crying silently. David was staring at the floor like he couldn't bear to watch. Robert was looking at his son with an expression that was half disappointment, half heartbreak. Matthew's knees buckled. He sat down hard on the hearth of the fireplace, still holding the ultrasound image, still staring at proof of his child. I love you, I said, and my voice broke completely. I have loved you since the night we met at that karaoke bar. I have been faithful to you every single day of our marriage. I would never ever betray you. But you didn't believe that. You didn't believe in us. And I don't know if I can forgive that. I picked up the divorce papers. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to call Richard Morrison and withdraw these papers. You're going to tell him you made a terrible mistake. And then you're going to decide what kind of man you want to be. The man who trusts his wife and fights for his family, or the man who throws it all away because he was too insecure to ask a simple question. I set the papers back down on the table. Picked up my bag. I'll be at the Riverside Hotel. Room 412. You have 48 hours to decide if you want to be a husband and a father. 48 hours to figure out who you are. I started walking toward the door. Aria, wait. Matthew's voice, broken and desperate and pleading. I turned back. Looked at him one more time. Saw the devastation on his face, the realization of what he'd done, the horror of almost losing everything. 48 hours, Matthew, I said quietly. Decide who you are. Then I walked out of that house and didn't look back. I drove back to the Riverside Hotel in a fog. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white, but I barely registered the drive. Barely saw the roads or the other cars or the gray December sky threatening snow. All I could see was Matthew's face as I'd walked out. The devastation. The horror. The slow collapse of a man realizing he'd destroyed everything that mattered based on nothing but his own broken mind. Back in room 412, I sat on the edge of the bed and waited for something to happen. For relief or satisfaction or vindication. For some emotional payoff after 3 weeks of gathering evidence and planning this confrontation. But all I felt was empty. My phone rang at 8 o'clock that evening. "David, are you okay?" he asked. "I don't know what I am. I wanted to tell you what happened after you left. Thought you deserved to know." I waited. "Matthew collapsed," David said quietly. "Not physically, he didn't pass out or anything. But emotionally. He just folded. Sat down on the floor holding that ultrasound image and sobbed. I've known Matthew for 15 years and I've never seen him cry like that. Never seen him break like that." I closed my eyes. Tried to feel something about that information. Couldn't quite access it. "Caroline tried to comfort him," David continued. "But Robert wouldn't let her for a while. He stood over Matthew and just tore into him. 20 minutes of brutal honesty about what it means to accuse your wife of infidelity without proof, about trust and marriage and how Matthew had dishonored both. I've never heard Robert that angry. Good, that bitter part of me thought again. Let his father be disappointed in him. Let him feel ashamed. James was worse in a way," David said. "He was quiet. Waited until Robert was done. Then he just said, 'You almost destroyed the best thing in your life because you felt inadequate? That's not strength, Matthew. That's cowardice.' And walked out." I imagined Matthew sitting on that floor, surrounded by evidence of his wife's innocence, being told by his father and brother that he'd failed as a husband. Part of me felt vindicated. Another part just felt sad. "He read everything," David said. "Every medical report, every witness statement, every piece of evidence you left. He kept saying she was telling the truth. The whole time she was telling the truth and I didn't believe her. Over and over like he couldn't process it. 'Why are you telling me this?' I asked. 'Because you deserve to know he's facing consequences. That his family isn't protecting him from what he did. But also because..." David paused. "Because he's broken, Arya. Genuinely remorseful. Terrified he's lost you forever. And I thought you should know that too." We hung up shortly after. I sat in that hotel room and tried to figure out what I was supposed to feel about Matthew being broken. Whether his pain balanced mine. Whether consequences felt like justice or just more hurt piled on top of hurt we'd both inflicted. The next morning I woke to someone knocking on my hotel room door. I checked the peephole. Caroline stood in the hallway, looking small and tired and older than I'd ever seen her. I almost didn't open the door. Almost pretended I wasn't there, that I'd gone out, that I wasn't ready to talk to Matthew's family yet. But something made me turn the deadbolt. "Please, Arya," Caroline said before I could speak. "Just 5 minutes." I let her in. We sat across from each other. Me on the bed, her in the single uncomfortable chair by the window, and she looked at me with eyes full of tears. She was trying not to cry. "I'm not here to make excuses for him," she said. "What Matthew did was unforgivable. Truly unforgivable. But I wanted you to understand where it came from. David already told me. Depression. Therapy. Inadequacy. It's more than that." Caroline twisted her hands in her lap. "Matthew has spent his entire life being compared to James. James was the better athlete in school. James got better grades. James got the scholarship to the better college. James got promoted faster at his company. Robert and I tried not to compare them, but families do it anyway. Friends do it. Teachers did it. And Matthew internalized all of it. I'd known some of this. Had seen the dynamic between the brothers at family gatherings, the way Matthew would sometimes get quiet when James talked about his accomplishments. When James announced Sarah's pregnancy at Thanksgiving, Caroline continued, something broke in Matthew. I saw it happen. Saw him smile and congratulate them while something inside him died. And then Robert made that comment about grandchildren. He didn't mean anything by it. He never thinks before he speaks. But it confirmed everything Matthew already believed about himself. That he was failing us. Failing you. Failing at being a man. that doesn't excuse what he did to me. I know. Caroline's voice cracked. I know it doesn't. But Arya, he's been in therapy since November. Trying to work through his depression, his feelings of inadequacy. He never told you because he was ashamed. Thought it made him look weak. And when you started pulling away, when you sounded distant on phone calls, when you stopped texting as much, his broken mind filled in the gaps with the worst possible story. He could have asked me, I said. One simple question. Arya, I saw charges to a clinic in Boston. What are they for? That's all it would have taken. But he didn't ask. He decided I was guilty and filed for divorce. Caroline nodded, tears spilling over now. You're right. You're absolutely right. And there's no excuse for that. But Arya, he loves you. He loves that baby. And if you give him a chance, I believe he'll spend the rest of his life proving he deserves you both. After she left, I sat alone with those words. Wondering if love was enough. Wondering if Matthew spending the rest of his life proving himself was what I wanted or just another burden to carry. On the 47th hour, 1 hour before my deadline expired, an envelope appeared under my door. I recognized Matthew's handwriting immediately. My name written in shaking letters across the front, like his hand had trembled so badly he could barely hold the pen. I almost didn't open it. Almost threw it away unopened because I wasn't ready to hear whatever excuses or apologies or pleas he'd written. But I opened it anyway. 3 pages. Handwritten. Every word slightly unsteady, like he'd been crying while he wrote. Arya, I don't have the right to ask you to read this. I don't have the right to ask you for anything. But I need you to know the truth about what happened in my head these last few months. I've been in therapy since November. Started after James announced Sarah's pregnancy. My therapist diagnosed me with depression and anxiety, said I've probably been dealing with it for years but never acknowledged it. She's been helping me understand why I feel like I'm never enough, why I compare myself to everyone else and always come up short. When you went to Boston, I was happy for you. Proud of you. That hotel restoration was everything you'd worked for. But then you started sounding different on our calls. Distant. Tired. And my broken brain started whispering that you were pulling away because you'd realized you could do better than me. I saw the credit card charges to the clinic. Should have asked you about them. Should have trusted you. But part of me believed I deserved to be betrayed. Believed you'd eventually leave me for someone better, someone more successful, someone who could give you the life and family you deserved. So I created a story where you were the villain. Where you were cheating. Where the baby wasn't mine. Because that story was easier than facing the truth. That I was so broken I couldn't believe my own wife loved me. But you never betrayed me, Arya. I betrayed you. I betrayed our marriage. I betrayed the trust you gave me. I filed for divorce without asking you a single question. Planned to humiliate you publicly. Convinced myself you were guilty because it was easier than admitting I was broken. I withdrew the divorce papers. Called Richard Morrison this morning and told him I made a terrible mistake. Told him my wife was innocent of everything I'd accused her of. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I destroyed something that might be impossible to repair. But I'm asking for a chance anyway. A chance to prove I can be better. A chance to be the husband you deserve and the father our daughter deserves. Yes, I know it's a girl. Mom told me. And I've been sitting here thinking about how I almost destroyed her before she even had a chance to be born. How I almost lost both of you because I was too cowardly to face my own inadequacy. Whatever you need from me, I'll do it. Counseling. Space. Time. Complete transparency about my therapy and mental health. Anything. Everything. I love you, Arya. I've loved you since that karaoke bar 7 years ago. And I'm so sorry. Matthew. I read the letter 3 times. Let the words sink in. Felt them chip away at the armor I'd built over the last 3 weeks. At exactly hour 48, someone knocked on my door. I knew who it was before I looked through the peephole. Matthew stood in the hallway looking like he hadn't slept in 3 weeks. Eyes red and swollen. Face drawn and pale. Hands shaking as he held a folder against his chest like it was the only thing keeping him together. I opened the door. I withdrew the papers, he said immediately. Voice hoarse, broken. Called Richard this morning. It's done. The divorce is cancelled. I waited. Didn't invite him in. Just stood there in the doorway while he struggled to find words. I'm so sorry, he finally said. I was scared and stupid and I let my insecurity destroy us. I should have trusted you. Should have asked you about those charges instead of assuming the worst. Should have believed in us. I looked at this man I'd married 7 years ago. The man who'd proposed to me in a karaoke bar while drunk on cheap beer and confidence. The man who'd promised to love me in sickness and health for better or worse. He'd broken those promises. But standing here looking at him, I could see he understood exactly how badly he'd broken them. If this is going to work, I said quietly, we have conditions. Hope flared in Matthew's eyes. Desperate, cautious hope. Marriage counseling, I said. Twice a week. Non-negotiable. You need to figure out why you didn't trust me. Why you let your depression and fear turn into accusations. Yes. Anything. You're moving out. Temporarily. I need space. I need time. You can be involved with the pregnancy, with doctor appointments, with everything. But I can't live with you right now. Can't sleep next to someone who thought I was capable of that kind of betrayal. Pain flashed across his face, but he nodded. Hey. Whatever you need. Complete transparency about your therapy, I continued. About your depression, your medication if you need it, your mental health. No more secrets. No more hiding things to protect me or protect your pride. I promise. And Matthew. I looked him directly in the eyes. If you ever accuse me of something like this again, I'm gone. No second chances. No counseling. Just done. Do you understand? I understand. I stepped back. Let him into the room. Watched him move carefully, like he was afraid sudden movements might shatter whatever fragile thing we were trying to rebuild. Can I see it? He asked quietly. The ultrasound? Our baby. I pulled it from my bag. The image I'd been carrying for 3 weeks. Our daughter, tiny and perfect. Measurements showing she was healthy and growing exactly as she should be. Matthew took it with trembling hands. Stared at it like he was seeing a miracle. I'm sorry, he whispered to the image. I'm so sorry I almost. His voice broke completely. I watched him cry over our daughter and felt something crack in my chest. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But something softer than the anger I'd been carrying. We have a long road ahead, I said. I don't know if we'll make it. But I'm willing to try. Matthew looked up at me with tears streaming down his face. Thank you. God, Arya, thank you. I'll do better. I'll be better. I promise. We stood there in that hotel room. 2 broken people, 1 ultrasound image, and a future that was suddenly uncertain but at least still possible. The first counseling session happened 2 weeks later. Dr. Angela Preston's office was in a converted Victorian house with high ceilings and large windows that let in too much light. Everything about it felt exposed, uncomfortable, like there was nowhere to hide from the truth we were about to excavate. Matthew and I sat on opposite ends of a burgundy couch that was too small for the distance we needed between us. Dr. Preston sat across from us in a leather chair, a notebook balanced on her knee, studying us with the kind of quiet attention that made me want to confess everything or run from the room entirely. Why don't we start with what brought you here, she said. Her voice was calm, practiced, the voice of someone who'd heard every marriage crisis imaginable and knew none of them were actually unique. I looked at Matthew. He looked at the floor. My husband accused me of having an affair, I said, while I was pregnant with his child. He filed for divorce without ever asking me if his accusations were true. Dr. Preston's pen moved across her notebook. And Matthew, is that accurate from your perspective? Matthew's hands clenched into fists on his thighs. Yes. I saw charges to a prenatal clinic and I convinced myself she was pregnant with another man's baby. I didn't ask her about it. I just assumed. And I was wrong about everything. Tell me what happened, Arya, Dr. Preston said. From the beginning. So I did. I told her about Boston and the pregnancy and the secret I'd kept to make the surprise perfect. About arriving early on Christmas Eve and hearing Matthew accuse me of infidelity. About the divorce papers he'd filed and the 3 weeks I'd spent gathering evidence to prove my innocence. I watched Matthew's face while I talked. Watched him flinch at every detail. Watched tears spill over when I described standing in his parents' hallway hearing him tell them the baby wasn't his. Watched him press his hand against his mouth when I explained checking into a hotel under my maiden name because I couldn't bear to go home to a house that felt contaminated by his accusations. By the time I finished, he was crying openly. Matthew. Dr. Preston's voice was gentle. Your turn. Tell us what was happening from your perspective. Matthew took a shaking breath. Started talking about his depression, his therapy that I hadn't known about, the feelings of inadequacy that had been eating him alive for months. About seeing the clinic charges and creating an entire conspiracy theory because believing I was cheating felt safer than believing I might leave him for being broken. I convinced myself she was too good for me, he said, voice barely above a whisper. That she'd realize she married the wrong brother. The failure. The one who couldn't even give his parents grandchildren. So when I saw evidence that she was pregnant and hadn't told me, my brain filled in the gaps with the worst possible story. Because I believed I deserved the worst. Dr. Preston was quiet for a long moment after we both finished. Then she set her notebook aside and looked at us with an expression I couldn't quite read. You're both victims of the same thing, she said. Miscommunication and fear. Arya, you were afraid to share the pregnancy news until it was perfect. Until you could tell Matthew in person, see his joy, create the moment you'd imagined. Matthew, you were afraid to share your depression until you'd fixed it. Until you could be the strong husband you thought Arya needed. You both kept secrets to protect each other. And those secrets almost destroyed you. I'd never thought about it that way. Had never considered that my secret, kept with love, kept to create joy, was fundamentally the same as Matthew's secret about therapy and depression. The question now, Dr. Preston continued, is whether you can rebuild trust that was broken not by malice, but by fear and miscommunication. That's harder in some ways than rebuilding from betrayal. Because you both have to acknowledge your part in what went wrong. I looked at Matthew. He was looking at me with red eyes and a face full of hope and terror in equal measure. I want to try, I said. But I don't know how. We'll figure it out together, Dr. Preston said. One session at a time. The rebuilding was slow. Glacially, painfully slow. Matthew moved into a small apartment near his office. A one-bedroom place with beige walls and generic furniture that looked nothing like him. I stayed in our house, sleeping in our bed, walking through rooms that held memories of who we used to be. We talked every evening. Scheduled calls at 7 o'clock that lasted exactly 30 minutes because that was what I could handle. Some nights Matthew told me about his therapy sessions with his individual therapist. About starting medication for depression. About exercises he was learning to challenge negative thoughts before they spiraled into paranoia. Some nights I told him about pregnancy symptoms. About the nausea that had finally faded around 16 weeks. About the way my body was changing, how clothes didn't fit right anymore. About doctor appointments he wasn't at, measurements and tests, and the fear I felt doing all of this alone while our marriage hung in the balance. Some nights the calls went well. We almost felt like ourselves again, talking and laughing and remembering why we'd fallen in love. Other nights I'd hang up crying because something he said reminded me of his accusations and the hurt felt fresh all over again. We attended counseling twice a week. Tuesday and Thursday evenings, sitting on that burgundy couch while Dr. Preston asked questions that made us both uncomfortable and necessary. Slowly, very slowly, I began to see changes in Matthew. He started asking questions instead of making assumptions. You sounded tired on the phone last night. Is everything okay with the pregnancy? Instead of, you sounded distant, are you pulling away from me? He started expressing fears instead of hiding them. I'm scared you're never going to forgive me, instead of staying silent and letting the fear fester into paranoia. He started trusting that showing vulnerability wouldn't make me leave. Started believing slowly that maybe he was enough. At 18 weeks pregnant, I had a major ultrasound appointment. Dr. Mitchell's office called to confirm the time and asked if I wanted to bring anyone. I said no automatically, then immediately felt guilty about it. That night on our scheduled call, I mentioned the appointment to Matthew. I'd really like to be there, he said carefully. If you're comfortable with that. I know I don't have the right to ask. But I've missed so much already and I'd like to see our baby. If that's okay. I thought about it for a long time. Thought about whether I was ready to share something so intimate with someone who'd hurt me so deeply. Okay, I finally said. You can come. He showed up at the clinic 15 minutes early, holding flowers and a teddy bear that was absurdly large and completely premature for a baby who wouldn't be born for months. I didn't know what to bring, he said, looking embarrassed. I just wanted to bring something. We sat in the waiting room making awkward small talk about weather and work until the technician called my name. The examination room was small and dim. I lay on the table while the technician squeezed cold gel onto my stomach and Matthew stood awkwardly by the wall, unsure where to position himself. You can come closer, I said quietly. He moved to stand beside me, close enough that I could smell his cologne, the same one he'd worn since we started dating, familiar and achingly nostalgic. Then the technician moved the wand across my stomach and our daughter appeared on the screen. She was perfect. Fully formed now, no longer the grainy abstract shape from earlier ultrasounds. I could see her profile, the slope of her nose, the curve of her spine. She moved while we watched, stretched, shifted, brought a tiny hand up near her face. "Everything looks great," the technician said. "Measuring right on track. Strong heartbeat. Do you want to know the sex?" Matthew looked at me. I looked at him. Saw tears already forming in his eyes. "Yes," I said. "It's a girl," the technician announced. Matthew made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. His hand reached out, hesitated, then carefully took mine. I let him hold it. Let our fingers intertwine the way they used to, back when touch between us was easy and natural instead of fraught with hurt. "A girl," he whispered, staring at the screen. "We're having a daughter." I watched him cry while looking at our baby girl. Watched him study every detail of the ultrasound like he was memorizing her. Watched him gently squeeze my hand like he was afraid I might pull away. "I'm going to be a better man for her," he said so quietly I almost didn't hear. "For both of you. I promise." I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him. 6 months after that terrible Christmas Eve, our daughter was born. Labor started at 3 in the morning. Contractions that woke me from sleep and sent me scrambling for my phone. I called Matthew first, before the hospital, before anyone else. He arrived at our house 20 minutes later, helped me to the car, drove to the hospital while I breathed through contractions and wondered if we were ready for this. Ready to be parents when we were still figuring out how to be married again. 14 hours later, Hope Elizabeth Thornton was born. We named her Hope because that's what she represented. What she'd given us when everything else was broken. A reason to fight. Reason to try. Matthew held her first. The nurses placed her on my chest, but I was exhausted and shaking and I asked him to take her while I recovered. I watched him cradle our daughter with trembling hands, watched him cry while studying her tiny face, watched him whisper promises to her about being the father she deserved. We weren't healed. Not completely. I still had moments where I remembered his accusations and felt anger flash through me. He still had moments where his depression made him doubt everything, made him afraid I'd realize I'd made a mistake giving him another chance. But we were trying. We'd rebuilt our marriage slowly, honestly. With counseling and communication and trust we earned back brick by careful brick. 3 months after Hope was born, Matthew moved back home. Not because everything was perfect, but because we were ready to try being a family under one roof again. Ready to wake up together for middle-of-the-night feedings. Ready to share the exhaustion and joy of new parenthood. Ready to see if the foundation we'd rebuilt could hold the weight of real life. On our 6th anniversary, Matthew gave me a gift. A new wedding band. Rose gold, delicate, engraved on the inside with words that meant everything. Asterisk, I choose trust. Boys. Asterisk. I wore it next to my original ring. The one he'd given me 7 years ago when we were young and naive and thought love was enough. Now we knew better. Love wasn't enough. Trust was what mattered. Honesty. Communication. Choosing each other every single day even when it was hard. We'd survived the worst thing I could imagine happening to a marriage. And on the other side, we'd found something stronger than what we'd had before. Not perfect. We'd never be perfect. But real. Honest. Ours. And that was enough. If this story of betrayal and redemption had you holding your breath, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Arya walked into that living room and laid out every piece of evidence on the coffee table. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more emotional stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.